Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Ross Yelsey. I'm an Assistant Director of Admissions and Marketing at Columbia Journalism School. I'd like to welcome you today for this webinar. And I wanted to let you know also that I know we have multiple programs at our school, so we'll be having events about all of those throughout the rest of this recruitment fall season. We have a Master of Science program, which is kind of the essential journalism training degree for people who want professional skills in journalism. We have a Master of Science in Data Journalism for people interested in learning how to use data as a reporting tool to do investigative work and learn how to do storytelling with data. We also have a dual Master of Science degree with computer science, with journalism and computer science, where you can learn about building applications that help people do better reporting and also to disseminate journalism more inventively. And we have a Master of Arts program for experienced journalists who want to go deeper into one of four concentrations, which is arts and culture, business and economics, politics, and science. So those are our kind of professional skills building master's degrees. But today we're talking about a very different type of degree, the doctorate in communications, the Ph.D. in communications offered at the journalism school, which is a very unique program. And I'm really happy to have Professor Andie Tucher, the H. Gordon Garbedian Professor of Journalism, and a current student, Adelina Yankova, in the doctoral program joining us today to talk about that. I'm also pleased to welcome Taryn Almanzar, our Associate Dean of Admission and Financial Aid, who will be monitoring the chat later. Right now, the chat will be off, but later you're going to be able to ask questions in the chat, and Dean Almanzar will be able to take some questions from there, and we'll bring those up as we can at the end of our discussion. So I think I'll start with Professor Tucher. Andie, could you tell us a little bit about your own teaching and research interests? And could you tell us a bit about your new soon-to-be-published book, which is called Not Exactly News, Fake News and Fake Journalism in American History?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And it's good to see you all. I'm really pleased to have a chance to chat with you. I love to talk about my work. I have a background in journalism and also a background in history. I did a Ph.D. in history and I worked in documentary journalism for 10 years. The book I'm working on now it's coming out in March. It's a history of fake news. And that's an urgent topic these days, obviously, but people seem to have the idea that it's brand new. And as my book explains, it goes back to the first newspaper published on the North American continent in 1690, had fake news about a sex scandal. But what I've come to conclude is that while fake news has been around forever, something almost more dangerous, more consequential is fake journalism. And I make that distinction throughout the book. Fake journalism being the use of the techniques and conventions and traditions of professionalized journalism in order to present information that is known to be false. So I think that's an interesting and important distinction that the book will explore.
Great. I put the link for that in the chat for people who want to look more at what that book will be about and just get to hear, read more about it there. But how would you say that kind of book project, Not Exactly News, reflects some of the work that the doctoral students do in the Ph.D. in communications program? And more broadly, what kind of students and kind of research interests is this program really well suited for?
The book is very interdisciplinary, and that's one of the great strengths of our program, one of the things that makes it particularly unusual. And the book itself, it is rooted in history, but it draws on sociology, it draws on political science, it draws on literature. It crosses traditional disciplinary boundaries. And that's one of the things that we can offer our students. They can craft a program of study for themselves, drawing on the resources of most of the graduate divisions of the university that will fulfill their research interests. So we're very flexible and we welcome all sorts of different approaches and topics that can take advantage of that opportunity. I also was able to benefit from being based at a journalism school, having colleagues who work as journalists, having access to our research centers, being able to teach a course in the history of fake news. So there's a lot of it. It's an academic community that works really well and is very supportive.
Great, thank you. And Adelina, I thought maybe you could tell us a bit about your own path into this program. Could you tell us more generally about how you decided that a doctoral degree or in that kind of pursuit was the right thing for you, and then how you did your research and determined that this type of program, our PhD in communications, was a good fit for your own interests?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to see all of you. I'm really glad this opportunity is here for you because research isn't always very easy. it's not always very easy to find information on PhD programs and compare them, especially in communications. So I graduated with my bachelor's in journalism in 2016. And I realized that I didn't want to be a daily reporter, but was still really passionate about journalism and the news and researching that and thinking about where is journalism going, who are the people who will be doing journalism in the future, how are we talking to young people who are currently going through J schools about that. And so I wanted to, I realized that I can still marry my interest of journalism with things that I really enjoyed, which were, and thought that I was good at, which were writing and teaching. So while I didn't want to be in a newsroom doing daily reporting, I still could research in this area. So I worked for a couple of years. I was in state government and then started looking at programs. This was one at the top of my list because a professor who I'd had went through this program, and it was actually his class that made me realize, it was a class on media and politics, and made me realize something like this is possible, where you think about how journalism, politics, government, citizenship all intersect. And it was the first time that I realized during my junior year, oh, okay, I don't have to, this degree is, it's not for naught, but rather I can take what I've learned and put an academic spin on it. I think the most important thing you can do, and something I did some of, wish I had done more of, is to meet people. So, it's difficult to necessarily do campus visits, and I don't think that's as important as when you're going to undergrad, let's say. But if you can talk on the phone with professors, if you can talk to current students at any of the universities, I think that's where you're going to get most of the information, because I really did find that it was hard to compare. It was sort of like apples and oranges across fields and across different schools. It's really hard to tell. Only now do I realize it makes sense that I ended up in this program because of its focus on journalism, which is where I'm coming from. A lot of other communications programs have more of a focus on rhetoric or communications theory, and while we have all of that, the focus on journalism here was really strong. So it was right for me. But I think I a little bit got lucky, if I'm being honest, because again, and I think it makes sense. The people who do admissions are good at their job, and they know, they can sort of tell who's going to be a good fit for the program. But I would say if you can talk to people, at least one or a couple of people at each of the programs you're most interested in, I think they'll really give you an idea, and then you can more easily compare.
Great, that's great advice. Thank you. And Adelina, I believe you're in your 4th year of the program, and I thought I'd ask Andie a little bit about what the structure is like year by year of a program like this, which extends, more years than a master's degree, which is often, 1 or 2 years, but a doctoral degree can take, several years to complete. Maybe we can demystify a bit about what happens year by year and what the process is like to go through a program like this.
Sure, yeah. We have 2 different scenarios, basically. People who come with no previous graduate level work that transfers, and I can talk about that in a minute, will do 3 years of coursework here. So the courses that are open to them are, as I said, most of the graduate divisions of the university have courses that are available to our students. They complete their coursework in 3 years. If you come with a previous master's degree that's relevant, that's applicable, that's acceptable, you can get up to 1 year's advanced standing, which means you do 2 years of coursework on the similar track. When the coursework is finished, you take another semester or so often to finish up the various requirements for what we call the MPhil, which is the final step before writing the dissertation. There's a language requirement. There are some independent work to do. Then you write your dissertation, and that can take, some people do it like that, some people take much longer. So the whole process, the fastest anyone has ever done it is 4 years. That person came in with advanced standing and had a really good idea before she started where she wanted to end up. It's possible to do it in 4 years. Much more frequent is anywhere between 5 and 8.
Thank you. And Adelina, could you tell us a bit about some of the courses you have taken in the course of doing this doctoral program, both maybe the ones at the journalism school and some of the ones you've sought out in other departments?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that really drew me to this program is how interdisciplinary it is. I mean, it really walks the walk in that sense. So across different departments, I was just trying to think, I've taken classes in sociology, art history, political science, history, anthropology maybe. I mean, oh, I took something in the creative writing department, or the MFA in writing program. So that's been really, really great. And there's definitely, I mean, the breadth of courses that are available to us are really, really impressive. It does also mean that, you know, it's a bit of a trade-off, right? Like you're in all these different departments and you're learning all these different things. And sometimes it can feel like, oh my gosh, I'm with all these sociologists and I don't really know that much sociology. But in the end, I mean, everybody's really friendly and welcoming and you end up catching up. So I really feel that my research has been made all the more rich for having been in all those different departments. And then within our department, Professor Tucher's class, which is required for everyone to take, is really, really great on journalism and society, and sort of gives you an overview from even before our first newspapers, before we have the colonies. You know, you started the printing press and you make it all the way to now. And those are always really rich discussions. We had people from other programs in that class, which also, I think, enhanced that class. I've taken a class on fake news and misinformation, a class on populism and liberal democracy and how that intersects with the media, class on history of capitalism. So those all, and that's cross-listed with history, but it's taught by one of the professors, core professors in our program. So I think just from those, you can tell that it's really kind of a wide array. And the reason I love this program so much is media, communications, journalism, there's always a way, because it's not, you know, arguably it's maybe a discipline, maybe not, right? It sort of spans all these other ones and intersects with them, which is why it's so nice to be able to, both within our department and outside of it, intermix with all these different fields.
Great. And Andy, you mentioned after the coursework is over, then it's the time to start to formulate your dissertation and propose that. Could you tell our kind of audience a bit about some of the dissertations that other students in the past have proposed and worked on, the themes and maybe some of the subjects of those?
Yeah. We have a list on our website. You can look and see more in-depth information, but there's lots of recent work. For instance, it often draws on what's going on, what's going on in society, what are concerns of people. So there's been a lot of work recently in various aspects of social media, aspects of surveillance, digital media, but they also, people find their own ways, and some standard approaches to how journalism works. We had a dissertation in how ordinary people feel about being swept up in a news story. A student who went out and asked a perfectly obvious question that I didn't know anyone else had ever asked before. So you witness a crime, you're quoted in the newspaper, how do you feel about it? That was really fun to read. We've had people working on the history of literary journalism in Latin America, the history of the photographic pose, the early regulation of radio and its intersection with religion, virtual foreign bureaus. So it's a wide range of topics, and people come with a general idea. We want people to have a general idea, but they almost always revise and shape and edit as they go along. So this is one of the reasons when you apply, we ask you to talk about your interests, but we don't want any kind of formal proposal, because we expect, we hope, we push you to change your mind once you're here and see and actually grapple with your topic.
Great. And one thing we didn't mention is that usually the incoming class size in the doctoral program is about 4 students. And I thought I'd ask Adelina about what it's like to be in a relatively small program like this.
Yeah, and I would just like to echo Andy and say, I mean, my project changed drastically, so it's okay if that happens. Most people's do. It's, I really love this program because I don't feel that it's very competitive, and I mean that in the best way. I think all the students, not just within our cohorts, but across the different cohorts, work really collaboratively, and some of like the best advice and the best questions I've received that have really changed my way of thinking have come from colleagues. So I think in that sense, maybe because there's not that many people, you get to know people pretty well, and you really care about them as scholars and as people. And I also think as a result, we have a really pretty close relationship with our faculty too, and really close direct link to them. I always feel like I can knock on any one of their doors, and so there's not a lot of bureaucracy between us and them because there are so few of us. So I think it's really, the process in some ways can be of like researching something where you're trying to create new knowledge, and ideally nobody else has done quite this thing before, by nature can be kind of isolating because you're like the one person doing it. And you'll find your community of scholars, but like your one thing is sort of the only thing you're doing. So it sort of helps to have people doing all kinds of different things and to commiserate in that sense. And I think it's really important to like look to each other for support in that. So whereas the research itself can sort of leave you out on your own little island at times, or at least it might feel like that. I think being part of a small program like this, where everybody kind of knows each other, helps from that support angle.
Mhm. Great. And so we've talked a bit about the academic experience, the courses, and then working on the dissertations. And then when you're actually nearing the end of the program and thinking about careers, I thought I'd ask Andie a bit about what some of our former students have done since finishing the program in terms of their career paths and kind of placements.
Yeah, well, obviously a lot of people come wanting to teach, and we've had some really great placements with people who are interested in teaching. We have, I'd say maybe more than half of our graduates have a tenured or tenure track job now in places like Oxford, Wisconsin-Madison, New School, IE University in Spain, Temple, Pace, Stony Brook, lots of different places. They're getting jobs. There are jobs teaching in communications. So that's one thing that we're really pleased with. But people don't necessarily come to become teachers, and we're happy to support them in their other paths as well. We've had several people started their own research companies or work as consultants. We have 2 people who had law degrees before they came, and they've now been able to focus on communications law. People have worked in government or nonprofit or NGOs, in finance, and some have continued to be journalists. So there's a wide range of activities that people take on afterwards, and we are really pleased to support anybody in any of the plans that they have.
Great, thank you. And Adelina, I know a lot of people who are viewing this are thinking of getting a doctoral degree either in our program or just in a program somewhere in the world. And I thought I'd ask you about advice, if just for people who are considering that path of getting a doctoral degree.
Yeah, I think, know what you want. And I don't mean know exactly what you're going to research necessarily, but sort of come into it to the extent that you can. There are things that you can't necessarily know until you're in a program, and there are going to be, idiosyncrasies about whatever program you end up in. But do you want to teach? Do you want to research? It's okay if that changes, but I think sort of knowing, I was somebody who came in really wanting to teach, and I am doing that now, which is really great. But it takes a while to get there, and sometimes it can, you can like sort of lose track of what is that thing that I came in for. And if you really want to research, know that about yourself. If you want to write books, again, it's okay for those things to change. But I think I was like, well, I want to teach, and I'm going to like make it happen no matter what on day one. And that's not necessarily how that's going to work. And self-discipline is really key, because like I said, a lot of the work is, if not necessarily, it might be, there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration too. A lot of it is solitary, but it's also just very self-driven. You are working on this project where you can, feedback is readily available, but you have to churn something out before you get that feedback. So I guess know yourself, know the way that you work, because that's going to be really important. I think set you up for success in a program like this. And there's not just one type of like work style that is compatible with this, but I think knowing that on the front end to the extent that you can will help.
Great, thank you for that advice. And for Andie, we mentioned it's a four-person cohort per year. What would make for a compelling application when you and your colleagues are looking at PhD applications each year, when you try to decide who will make that four-person cohort come together?
Yeah, it is very competitive, but we look for the most important piece of your application is your statement of research interests. I think we look at that really carefully. As I said, we don't want to know your proposal right now, what you're going to write your dissertation about. We don't need a formal proposal of any kind. We don't need you to identify an advisor or a sponsor right now. What we want is a thoughtful statement, and brief, 750 words is not a lot, that gives us a good idea of the kind of questions that interest you. Not necessarily the answers you're going to find, figure that out when you get here, but the questions that you want to look into. And it should be a research plan that takes good advantage of our interdisciplinary nature, because as we've said, that's one of the things that makes us unique. So that's the most important piece to focus on. But we also, clearly, we look for academic excellence in your previous academic work. We do not require journalism experience. This is an academic and scholarly degree. Many people come with journalism experience. We have many former journalists. We have some people who got the MS degree here at Columbia and kind of figured out who we were and wanted to apply. But that's an advantage in their particular kind of work, but it's not necessarily something we look for in our program. We do the GRE this year is optional. It's completely up to you whether you want to submit that or not. We won't judge either way. The language, the TOEFL or IELTS scores, those are required. We don't waive those if your native language is not English or you haven't been educated in English. We ask for letters of recommendation, and for those, our program tends to attract a lot of people who have been out in the world working. So they may not have recent academic people who can write letters for them. We would still prefer that we have at least one, but especially if you've been out in the world for a while, you can give us letters from people you've worked with, supervisors, colleagues, who can give us a sense of how you might handle academic material. And we value diversity. We look for diversity in many different ways, demographically, geographically, in your background, in your experience. That's very important to us as well.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So now what I've done is I've turned on the chat function on here, and I would ask that if you have questions that have come up, please just write to Associate Dean of Admission and Financial Aid, Taryn Almanzar, in the chat area. The rest of us won't be able to respond to your questions, so just write to Taryn, and she will be able to bring up some of the ones that we have time for. But happily, a lot of you have put questions in the registration form for this event, and I've written down some of the ones that we'd like to go over because they were very common amongst people who've registered for this particular discussion. And I thought I'd start with a question, I think this goes to Andie and to Adelina, about what is the biggest misconception people have about this degree program when you maybe talk about it with friends or colleagues or people who are interested in pursuing something like this?
Oh, biggest misconception. Adelina, do you have any thoughts to start with?
I think that it's more something that I'm finding out now that I've been in the program for a while is people think it's more structured than it is. And by that, I mean, I have a lot of friends either in law school or business school who have a very regimented type of schedule. A lot of their classes are picked out for them. And even if they're not, they know exactly when they're going to end. Like my partner's in law school and he's known from day one when he's going to be done. And so I have a lot of friends being like, oh, so you're almost done, right? Or like, when are you finished? And that the closer I get to the end, the more anxiety inducing that question becomes. But because I don't feel that close to the end. So I think that it's like college or that it's like a master's program. I think people use these I think people don't usually know as many people in PhD programs as they do in these other types of programs. And so they kind of expect, or they'll be like, oh, is it like a 2-year program? And then it's just, and that's a hard thing to hear when you're like, when you're looking at 5 or 6 or more. So yeah, people don't really know what it is. And it can be, after a while, taxing to explain.
Yeah. One of the things that I find is that people don't expect it to be fun. And it can be really hard. It can be really lonely. You can have those moments. Everyone has had those moments where you think, I can't do this. I've got to stop. That happens with, things in life anyway. But there's also a real element of pleasure that at least I found when I was doing my own graduate work. You have a chance to spend time thinking about something really interesting and maybe a little hard that no one else has thought about in exactly that way. And you get the time to do it. And it can just be mind-blowing to be able to have that opportunity. So it will be hard. It is a long slog. It's a big commitment and requires, some serious thought, but you also could end up having a great time.
Yeah, That's true. If I could just add, I think sometimes some friends pity me. They're like, you're going to be in school forever. And I'm like, well, that's not the worst thing. But yeah, it really is like, my job is to create new knowledge, which is really, really cool. So I don't mean to scare anyone off and be like, you're going to be alone and sad and any of those things. I want to be honest. It's not easy, but it's rewarding.
Mhm. Great. I thought one other thing I thought of when I thought about misconceptions was about the term communications. And I know there are departments in other schools that have communications programs that are more about learning about how to do public relations or marketing or direct communications or maybe speech and language pathology or things like that. Do you find that, sometimes you have to clarify a bit about what this particular communications term means in our program?
Yeah, well, communications is such a squishy term and it can mean so many different things. And as you say, many programs have a wide variety of things under their umbrella. Other people look at a PhD in communications based at a journalism school and they think, oh, it's super duper advanced journalism, which is not either. It's not, you're not getting deep techniques about how to make people answer what your reporter's questions. It is the way we think about it is, it's a way that we look at technological and financial and sociological and historical and philosophical aspects of the way people create and exchange information in society.
Mhm.
But we do not go into the professional areas of public relations or rhetoric or speech. Those are not the specialties that we have here. And this is not the right place. If that's what interests you, there are some really good places that will be able to supply those needs.
Great, thanks. And then we have a question about the application and specifically about the writing sample that you ask for in terms of what's a good idea of what to submit for that in your application.
Yeah, we prefer something that is academic because we're an academic program and most of the writing you will be doing is academic. We do, I will add as an aside, all of the 4 faculty members are ourselves good writers who value good writing, and we are perfectly delighted to have people who write well. We do not believe that academic writing needs to be boring and dull, but we do want to see how you think about academic and scholarly issues. So we would prefer that at least one of your submissions that you can submit to should be something that's academic. If you really don't have anything like that, some kind of reported piece, deeply reported piece, certain kinds of journalism that are done with a lot of research as well as reporting, those would also be okay as well. But it should be something that you think speaks well about yourself.
Mm-hmm. And also for a question about applicants who want to maybe, get to know the faculty ahead of applying, what's the best practice if you want to introduce yourself to potential faculty that you'd like to work with when you're an applicant?
Yeah, as I said, we don't need you to identify a sponsor or someone you want to work with. If you're interested in talking to someone, that makes perfect sense. Email is probably the best approach. Email that person, see whether if you're in town, you can see whether it's possible to meet. You can email correspondence is always probably the most direct and immediate way that you can get a response. But yeah, you're welcome to let us know something about yourself and what it is and what your questions are about the program.
Great. And Adelina, you mentioned teaching, in fact, you're teaching earlier, and we had a question about just what kind of training or opportunities do students have to build a teaching portfolio while they're going through the program?
Yeah, so there's the Center for Teaching and Learning. Is that right, Andy?
Yeah, I think that's what it's called.
On campus, yeah, which I know has, and I had signed up for, I haven't done too much with them is the point. But I know that that's a resource and something that I do want to call upon. I took a class at Teachers College, so that there's some opportunities there. A lot of people after they're done with coursework go on to adjunct a class, either maybe sometimes at Columbia, but oftentimes at another college or university around New York. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm teaching a course at NYU. So that's really, it's the best teaching. It's sort of trial by fire in that sense, but there are a lot of opportunities. Again, the Center for Teaching and Learning, I know, is one that many people turn to, and that's available to people across the university, and one that I myself want to look more into.
Great. And a question about, this is a very, a long program, a program that's very self-driven. Just a question maybe for both of you about, what kind of mindsets or traits will help you succeed at kind of going through a program like this, which will, take a lot of time and determination to complete.
That's something Adelina knows is dealing with right now.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is being organized. I think that can be, as far as like a very hands-on skill. The more you can stay organized, the better. I think having patience and just trusting the process. I mean, I really, that, as corny as that sounds, I think that's the biggest thing I've learned is when people say trust the process, that's very applicable to our program. Sometimes you sort of, you're going through and you're like, I'm not sure where this is going. And then you get this awesome moment of like, it all comes together. Yeah, I think, again, keeping whatever goal it is that you have, and many different goals are okay. Again, whether that's teaching, whether that's research, whether that's working in the industry, but keeping whatever that is, whatever like your motivator is, sort of top of mind. And being open, I think, to feedback, and just being open-minded generally, feedback from professors, feedback from other colleagues, feedback across different departments. I think that can only better your work.
Great. And a question also in terms of applicants, a question about whether age plays any factor in terms of deciding who's a good fit for the program. Can you be either on the too old or too young to be considered is kind of what I think the question is.
It plays no role whatsoever. We have accepted a number of students right out of undergraduate college. We've also accepted people who have been out in the world and working and making other careers for themselves for years. We've had people, I don't want to name ages to give anyone away, but no, that's the least of the concerns of the admissions committee.
Great. And a question also about, for people who are doing the program, if they're here kind of for these multiple years, how many should they probably expect to be having to be based in New York to be doing the program?
Well, certainly during the coursework years, which is either 2 or 3. The added consideration there is also that for in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th years of study, all students receive a financial aid package that requires in return some kind of teaching or research service. Some of that can be done from off campus. Often you need to be on campus. So 4 years is probably a good way to think about being here, although that is adjustable. A bare minimum is 2. Once you've finished, you've completed your service responsibility, you can leave the campus. You can go anywhere that your family or other requirements suggest. It helps to keep a connection in some way. It helps to set up some kind of regular meeting with your advisor over Zoom, or get involved in a writing group, or do something like that to keep a connection. Because once you're out there and you're writing and you're all alone, it can get kind of lonely and challenging. But we work to help people connect there too. I've had students, one of them needed to move back to her home country. So every Friday she sent me what she had written that week. And sometimes it was a sentence, and sometimes it was 3 pages, and sometimes it was terrible, and sometimes we threw it away. But it was a place that she could connect. It was a way for her to connect and feel that there was somebody keeping an eye on what she was doing. So there are various opportunities to work out different kinds of relationships. But the bottom line is you need to think about being on campus during the academic year, certainly for 2 or 3 years, and probably 4.
Mm-hmm. And then a question, just a little more clarification in terms of how you decide who will be your advisor, and kind of at what time that, kind of locks into place in terms of who you're going to work primarily with.
That's generally an organic process. I am the director of the program, so I'm everybody's advisor for the first couple of years. And I'm perfectly happy to step in and connect people with a potential advisor if that seems to be an issue, but it's never been an issue. I've never had to do that. People generally have a good sense. Somebody they've taken several classes with, who they click with, somebody who's particularly interested in their work, a mentor, somebody whose work they particularly like. It usually becomes obvious. Do you have anything, Adelina, to add to how you found your way
In the program?
To an advisor? How did you?
An advisor. Yeah, I think it happens pretty organically, honestly. I think I've taken quite a few classes with Professor Schudson, and it's like, it's kind of an abstract thing to say, but I think you sort of figure out how you think compared to how, faculty member X thinks. And there are certain people who think differently, people who come from similar like fields or schools of that. So like the sociologist, like, we have the sociologists and the historians sort of, I think, in our program, which aren't necessarily like vastly different, but, and there's a lot of overlap, I think, in everyone between those two fields. So yeah, I think research interests, but again, I don't think anybody in the program, I say this very genuinely, because I've had people ask me before, like, what sort of thing should I pitch? Should I try to think up a project that clearly would line up with, Professor Tucker's research? I'm like, no, I don't think that's what anybody wants. I think they want you to be naturally curious and genuinely interested in whatever it is that you're doing. That said, after you figure that out, I think, there's certain research, broad research areas where it makes sense to work with one person over another.
Great. And I think this is a question we had on last year's webinar too, but it's one about whether you could take courses at other universities in the kind of New York tri-state area that might be applicable to your research interests.
Yeah, there is what's called an inter-university doctoral consortium. There are certain restrictions and limits on that. You need to get permissions from your home school and the school where you're interested in taking classes. Some classes are closed off by the other school, and we can't challenge that. But yeah, there are opportunities to take classes at the New School, at NYU, at the CUNY Graduate Center. I think it's Stony Brook, possibly Princeton. So yeah, through a bureaucratic process. But yes, that's definitely an option.
Great. And I think those were the questions we've got in advance. Taryn, do you have any questions you're getting in the chat?
Yes, I have quite a few. Thank you for your questions. They're right on point, and I will shed some light into the program. I've put them into three categories, Andie and Adelina, just so that you can both jump in. To continue with the topic of courses, one of the questions delves into the fact that this is pretty much a self-directed program, and they want to know if there are any foundational courses that prepare the students for thesis writing and research skills development. Also, like, how much guidance do you get in selecting the courses?
Yeah, we have 5 required courses that everybody needs to complete. 3 of them are specific courses taught by faculty here, the core faculty in the program. One of them is an introduction to journalism and society. One of them is a prose seminar, which is a deep dive into some of the foundational literature of communications. And one of them is a dissertation research seminar. Maybe Adelina can talk about her experience in that, which is designed to help people identify their dissertation topic and get the proposal underway. We also have 2 courses with a certain amount of choice. One of them has to fulfill the role of comparative politics, and one of them has to fulfill something in contemporary organizations and institutions. There is lots of advice about this, most of it coming from predecessors in the program. They're always happy to share what they've found with the new students. There is often a strong bond developing between the people who've been here a few years and the newest people. And there's plenty of guidance about, this is a good course, this one is not so good, this one, avoid this one is going to give you this, but not that. So we've been around long enough that we've been able to get a good sense of what's out there and what works, and to help people get there.
Yeah, we have a Excel spreadsheet of like classes that people have taken and sort of reviews, and it's updated to a variable degree depending on what's going on during that time of the year or semester. But there's definitely some, I mean, I think, yeah, people are very, very happy to share experiences they've had, to recommend classes, also say, maybe stay away from this class, or hey, just so you know, this class is actually, it sounds like it's X, but it's actually Y. So if you're looking for X, maybe do this instead. And yeah, I think the dissertation, the research seminar, the dissertation workshop, dissertation seminar, it goes by a few different names, but it's an opportunity to share your work at whatever stage it's at, and share that with the professor. Usually Professor Todd Gitlin teaches that, and then with our colleagues. And because people are working in so many varied projects, that also means they are working with various methods. So there isn't necessarily one prescribed, these are the methods that you use, but rather let's look at your project and let's think about what tools you might need to further research this. So that might look like, oh, there's a great class in the sociology department that we can try to get you into. So there's not, I think, there's not a methods course is the point, which sometimes I think scares people, but I think the important thing to realize is people are working on such different projects that it's like, are you doing field research? Is it ethnography? Are you in the archives? Are you interviewing people? Are you working with data? Like there's so many different types of projects that people do, that seminar is really a way to sort of focus what it is that you need, and then try to get you those resources while receiving feedback on whatever work it is that you have written or researched or just kind of in your head. And it's helpful to not just be in your own head. So it's a way to focus the work in that sense.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Andie, this question is for you. Continuing on with the topics of courses, how does a student qualify for advanced standing? And does having a journalism background, either a degree or professional experience, plays into that determination?
Okay, advanced standing, we have to follow the university's policy on advanced standing, which means that if it applies to certain previous work that you've done. If you have received a previous master's degree in an academic area that is relevant to your research at an acceptable accredited institution, you will probably be able to get up to 1 year's advanced standing against the 3 years of required coursework. We ask you to show us a transcript. The decision is not formally made until after the student completes the first semester. So you don't know when you arrive here that you will have that. But we can give you a pretty good idea whether or not it's going to qualify. Sometimes people can get 1 semester rather than a whole year of advanced standing. If people have a previous journalism degree, oddly enough, that usually does not count for advanced standing because that's considered a professional degree. And by university policy, professional coursework is not acceptable for an academic scholarly degree. Some other, like if you had a master's in library science or social work with that kind of previous preparation, that also would not transfer. So sometimes people will come and they'll have done a master's degree in journalism with some academic coursework. In that case, we can look at that and say, well, we'll give you 1 semester. Advanced standing is given in increments of 1 semester only. So if you have 2 courses, that doesn't help. You need to have at least 1 semester. Previous journalism work, no. Since we're an academic program, we don't require previous journalism work. We're interested in it. We're interested in what you might have learned from that kind of work that makes you interested in doing a communications PhD. It certainly does not hurt you, but it's not something that we either require or that we give special standing to.
Thank you for clarifying that. And this question is for Adelina. How does your current research project for the PhD relates to your work in the future? Are you thinking of making that project an eventual field of research or classes? Like, how are you marrying your dissertation to your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I research, my big question is, what is the future of journalism? Where are we going here? And I was thinking, well, we're always talking to current journalists as far as like what do we need to do in journalism to stay current and to keep it afloat. And we talk to media owners, maybe academics, but the people that nobody really seemed to be talking to are college students who will be doing, or like college aged people who will soon be doing the work. So my research is in how young people produce journalism, how they're filling gaps in local reporting. As everybody is talking about news deserts. Well, oftentimes even areas that don't have local news, like a professional local newspaper. If there's a college, they're going to have a college newspaper that fills in that gap. And then, of course, issues of censorship and free speech arise out of that. So my goal as it stands is to teach at a university. So, I want to publish a dissertation eventually into a book, as many people do, and sort of have that, I think it makes a lot of sense. The fact that I'm studying students and want to teach at a university, but regardless of what my project was, I still think that would stand true. I could still take whatever it is and kind of keep developing that research area and do that as a researcher and an instructor at the college level. So yeah, so for me, it's academia is how it's looking. And I definitely want teaching to be some part of what I end up doing. So even if that changes and I decide to do something that's, like industry or private sector, I think I'll still want to teach to some extent. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I'm researching. And to me, it makes kind of perfect sense that that's where I would go.
Good, thank you. Andie, this question is for you. Is it possible to sit in on a class, either in person or via Zoom?
The Zoom is more plausible right now because the university has a lot of restrictions on off-campus, on non-campus visitors because of COVID. So this is not a good time to come and expect to be on campus. Zoom occasionally works if the professor is using Zoom, but we're trying to do more in-person teaching now to be more normal. So it's not necessarily true that there will be a Zoom setup for any particular class. You can request from a professor, but it's harder this year. It's harder this year for all sorts of logistical reasons.
Thank you. And I see that we're running a bit out of time. As Ross has stated on the chat, I know that some of you have more questions and or even as you think about this whole session and you're going to think of other questions or concerns that you might not have thought about right now, do feel free to reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to have conversations with you. Over to you, Ross.
All right, thank you, Taryn. Thank you for moderating the chat there. And I did see some questions coming my way in the chat too, but we just don't have the time, unfortunately, to get into all of the details with you today, just in the Zoom chat. So definitely write to us at apply.journalism@columbia.edu to follow up with us. Be happy to chat more. And I put in the link as well for upcoming admissions events. We'll go over some of the admissions requirements and financial aid topics in the future too. So if you have questions about that, we'll be happy to get into more detail during those upcoming events. We have one actually tomorrow. So if you have time, you can join us for that. I'd like to thank Professor Andie Tucher and Adelina Yankova for giving such great insights into the PhD in Communications program with us today. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day or evening or morning, wherever you are. And we look forward to keeping in touch.